I'm Javar Juarez for the New Progressive Journal. The A. Philip Randolph Institute, APRI, convened its 2025 Southern Regional Conference in Raleigh during the final week of May. Far more than a routine gathering, the event was a profound reaffirmation of the enduring legacies of A. Philip Randolph and Bayard Rustin, whose work fused the labor movement with the moral imperative of civil rights. The conference's theme, Boots on the Ground, aptly captured both the urgency and the grassroots commitment that permeated every session, speech, and strategic conversation throughout the weeks-long conference. Now, the New Progressive Journal, CUBNSC, had the privilege of witnessing firsthand how the A. Philip Randolph Institute is preparing the next generation of civil rights leaders, labor organizers, and community partners. Across the southernmost regions and through international collaboration, APRI is building a formidable response to this moment, one rooted in solidarity, education, and historical consciousness. Through intense workshops and panels and intergenerational dialogue, APRI's Southern Regional Conference was both a space of resistance and a celebration of community. Under the leadership of President Clayola Brown, the first woman to head APRI, the organization has not only preserved its founder's vision, but expanded its reach and impact. Born in Charleston, South Carolina in 1948, Brown began her activism at age 15, organizing alongside her mother at the Manhattan Shirt Factory. From there, she rose through the ranks of ACTWU, Unite, and Workers United, holding roles from Civil Rights Director to International Vice President. In 2004, she assumed the presidency of the A. Philip Randolph Institute, marking a pivotal moment for the organization. Brown's leadership style remains rooted in deep listening, intergenerational collaboration, and principled directness. Her vision is not of top-down leadership, but a collective engagement, a movement where every voice matters and where youth are seen not just as the future leaders, but as present ones. Here's the interview.
Well, good morning. My name is Clayola Brown. First of all, if anyone hears this who's from Charleston, know about the hike. It's Union Hike on paper, but it was a place where most black families came together. It was a run-to spot for those of us coming out of the country. When I say country, I'm talking about Utahville, Holly Hill, Vance, all of that area up there, where you got tired of walking behind a mule and smelling mule farts, all right? Charleston was a big city. But coming to Charleston, all of the glitter and glamour that folks had talked about, to those of us that had a country experience in our early years, was not necessarily so, because racism and prejudice ran deep then, continues to run deeply now, but there the separation was made clear. You didn't have to guess, again, what people were thinking of you or your situation, which was good and bad, because folks knew what ground they had to stand. And it made the community on the hike one that was very close. It was like a huge family. Now, when it comes to all of the amenities, that did not exist. But we've learned from the very beginning of our lives, from a very young age, how to survive. And those survival skills came in handy being a Charlestonian. Opportunity was there, you just had to figure out how to use it. There were a lot of family units across the hike. The street started with the alphabet A and ran all the way to the alphabet U. And on those streets, people that you may not have been related to by birth were folks that you called Aunt and Annie and Grandma. And those three would be the license to whip your tail if they saw you doing something out of line. So the practices that you think you could get away with or thought you could get away with did not end once you cross over from Brutus to Beach. Because on every one, Beach, Comstock, Delaware, Echo, going down the alphabet of those streets, there was somebody that had their eyes on you. But the best part was that it wasn't just for punishment. It was also for love and encouragement. And every step of the way was a lesson to be learned because the elders took their role seriously. And that's the part that brought us close together. If there was a meal in one house but not in another, folks were not ashamed to say, I need a little help this week. And they brought it together. Family unit eating was not an anomaly. It was a necessity because people had to figure out how to survive. That's why economically, spiritually, and educationally, that family unit has walked with me throughout my entire life. Because the first thing that I learned right there on Union Hike was no matter what they called you, they had to call you by your name, and your name represented your family. So directors, vice president, president, all of that stuff was secondary to me from the onset. The organization was what was important. And I understood from the upbringing that no matter where on that totem pole people fell, including myself, that it was necessary to have respect for one another and to understand it was a duty to pull people along. Because if you're the only one, you ain't nothing but a target, baby. But if you have folks that you know what you know because you shared it, you got an army. We were also taught to take a look at who we were. When men in our community started to be involved in the movements, like the longshoremen and others, working at the steel plant, and they came home, the women in the community on the hike celebrated them because we respected how hard they worked. And in their effort to do better for their family, that broader family also benefited from it because there was an example of what a unit could do. Men from the longshoremen came home and talked about their work on the docks and encouraged the young men to get the skills early enough to be able to do it. It wasn't just about the backbone work. It was about the work of watching around you and learning from each other. That was the talk. The resources, the dollars, of course, were important, but the integrity was just as important. You earned not just for your family, but you earned for where you lived and for your church, so that everybody prospered as you were growing. At 15, my mother brought me home from Philadelphia because my stepfather was in the Navy, and we moved from the hike. But at 15, my mother had sent me to Philadelphia to finish my high school education before coming back to South Carolina. And when I came home, I went to work with her at a place called Manhattan Shirt Factory, all right? I had the kind of fear that memories bring to you, watching how white supervisors, and I say white specifically because that's all that was there. I'm not prejudiced because I know some poor white people that were also part of the upbringing, all right? But the way they talk to folks, and I watched my mother, who was 6 feet tall, a total Geechee, took no jump from anybody. I watched her organize in that plant people to stand up with dignity, to be respectful, but also not to be walked on. They came there to do work and to earn a living, but they did not leave their dignity at the door. I was like, okay, that's my mama. And from that point, when we organized that plant to become union, there was a teaching lesson going every day. Every time we had a break, every time we had lunch, Every time we met in the parking lot before going home, there was a report out of how was your day. That wasn't just a question of courtesy. It was to find out how were they living in that situation during the course of the day, and collectively how we could change that. Unions have learned a better way to communicate too. Just because the belief is strong inside of the organizations that we work with does not mean that it has translated into our communities. But showing, sharing, teaching, leading, but also listening and following is the practice that has made unions much stronger. We've never had the kind of support from young people that we've got today. Young people under the age of 30 are more than 60% supportive of unions. That's mind-blowing to me, because the people that seem to be the ones that they look to in order to achieve or to get that thing that they think is power was not necessarily in the workforce or in the field of trade unionism. It was with stars and athletes and all the rest. But understanding that the power comes from them and the collection of unity is becoming more and more clear. I think probably because racism took another whole step forward, and the separation of people, separating men from women, separating straight from gay, separating whatever from whatever, that kind of separation is poison. The creation of boogeyman has become a whole nother kind of entity. But understanding that all of us are the same is where unions come from. Courage is something that's hard to give to someone. Support is easier, and helping to build that courage and strength and believing in themselves and the community in which they are in is one that's a key responsibility for the unity that exists inside of the labor movement. Po people, regardless of color, knows when they po, okay? They know when they're missing a meal. They know when they have to really think about taking a child to the hospital or to the doctor. They know that when they're sick, they want to be able to stay home to get better, rather than going into a plant or a business when they're ill. And the rights that they're willing to fight for makes the change, makes the difference. And that's the way we have to understand each other. Because when you talk about all the changes that are now looking to happen, Medicare, Medicaid, all of the things that taps that. Remember when the big talk used to be the welfare mama and all the rest of that? So you look at the SNAP programs that are being hit now. SNAP is primarily utilized by people who are white. And SNAP is not something that folks are using to go out and buy liquor. They're trying to buy food for their families. And that's all of the communities. Diapers, medicine, you name it. Those are essentials, and every human being should not have to worry about those things. Good government provides that, not as a token giveaway, but through what we already pay for in our taxes, what we already earned when we get Social Security. All of those things belong to us by virtue of the work that we've put in. When I say work, I'm talking about collective community. Some people have been working since they've been 5 and 6 years old. That counts for something. The dignity of work should not have to disappear.
Talk to us about the Institute and the time that you've been a part of it.
You say his name and I smile right away, because I'm old enough to remember some of the struggle that was there. I can remember seeing porters on the railroad coming home dressed all slick and dignified and looking spiffy, but having meetings at the end of their run with the community leaders, because they're bringing the news from the north to the south. Not only bad news, but good news, where jobs are, where black families are communicating or building a whole nother community based on the economics there. I remember also looking at how sharp they were and feeling the pride in that. But I also remember, even in the 70s, when in Harlem, which was supposed to be our safe territory, where people were still having to speak, standing on a ladder, to talk to the community about what was happening to us and how we could make that change. I did not know Randolph personally, but I had an opportunity to hear him several times, talking about the importance of unity, dignity, and pride, and courage being reinforced. Randolph was brilliant, but all that he did not do alone. He had an absolutely incredibly bright man that worked with him, who had his own struggles. When you think about Randolph, the thought should also come to you about Bayard Rustin. His incredible intellect was being challenged and pushed back because he happened to be an openly gay man. Now, in our heads today, a lot of people can say, what the heck does that have to do with it? But then, the stigma of being gay was coming not only from the outside, inside the church, all of those who were prominent leaders, you name it, it was there. But Randolph was big enough and bold enough to walk past that, so that Rustin would be able to put his intelligence into play. Randolph was a gentle giant. He knew how to talk to prominent folks, and he was respected all the way up to the White House. Not always by the president, but most times by that First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt in particular. And Eleanor Roosevelt was close to my soror, Mary McLeod Bethune. And when women get together, we can strategize pretty good, no matter what the title, again, is of the person who's the mouthpiece that's out there. Randolph knew that there had to be a real show of strength and force. And when the first piece of his decision to bring forth a showing of that, 1941, they did not believe, either outside and sometimes on the inside, that it could happen. But we had paid again and earned the right to have everything that everyone else had. An executive order, you know it by the number because it was what was being called all over the country. 8801, subtotal 02, and in the hood, that thing with the numbers, okay? Where folks who had served in the military should have the rights that veterans were having when they came home. And that a march would be held to lift that up so people would know about why there was discontent. It took Eleanor Roosevelt to convince her husband that this needed to be addressed. And when a woman sits down with her man in a one-on-one, there's going to be some real conversation that happens. Mary McLeod Bethune, along with Eleanor, told the story. And Eleanor Roosevelt was the one that made it safe for a march to happen in 41. But after the conversation, the march didn't even need to happen. The implication and the impact of a decision, a real executive order, not the stuff that makes you look like a dictator, was put to the forefront, and that march did not have to happen. But veterans who were black became entitled to most, not all, to most of the benefits that veterans earned by serving in the military. But that didn't serve all of it. Randolph continued to talk, to educate, and to go not just to our community, but to schools and Ivy League schools too, to make sure that messaging through not only his voice, but through his paper, The Messenger, was shared with those who could make a difference. When trying to organize the sleeping car porters, he had to fight inside of his own community to make that reality happen. And it wasn't in the South, it was in Chicago, Illinois, where the biggest fights took place, because them crabs in the barrel started to pull up. Everybody wanted to be in charge. That wasn't important to Randolph. What was important to Randolph was the principle and the object of organizing in that fashion. And when Rustin became a partner, Rustin didn't care what he said because it was always the truth. He didn't have to think about it twice. He took whippings all down in the South, got put in the trunk of cars because pastors were afraid to have him seen publicly. But every day he was out of that trunk and out and did the planning. Everybody talks about Dr. King being the orchestrator of the march. Not true. Miseducation is something that we're suffering with, and with folks who are looking to erase our history, a lot of that will happen unless we push back. The orchestrator of the March on Washington was actually Bayard. He was the one that was bold enough and brave enough to tell them how many people were going to show up on the mall. And the number was bigger than even what he projected, because the message was true, honest, and reached everyone that understood the purpose. They showed up and they showed out. Well, I do a lot of listening instead of a whole bunch of talking to the folks in the Institute to try and figure out what kind of fight we're planning for. I don't know everything, and I know that. No one person in the Institute knows everything, and hopefully they know that too. Listening to where people are willing to go in a struggle, they have to own it. If someone thinks that they can design it and tell people exactly what we're going to do, you're losing already, because that's your fight. That's not everybody's fight. We have some folks who are young as 15 that can tell us more about what it is that people who are 15 and on the streets want to hear from us and what they want to say to us. The door has to be open for people to be able to express in order to have people participate. I will follow our young people no matter what, because first of all, I walk slower, but they know what it takes in order to go to the future that they're looking for. And if those of us who are elders are not willing to follow and support them, then we're giving up on the future. It's marvelous to see them come together and strategize, and to support them in both ways. To say, well, baby, this and this and this happened back then, but that does not necessarily restrict you from the ideas that you have. Let us help you get past the steps that we ran into while we were young in our stage and didn't have the courage that you have in your stage to walk past that. Show us how to follow you. And if you fall, we're right here to pick you up.